welcome everyone to Policy Exchange. Thank you for joining us this evening. Our guest tonight is a true Renaissance man. He is an award-winning author of many books and a great expert on all kinds of subjects, from genomics to evolution to ecology to finance. It's very hard to find something that he doesn't know a lot about. And his book that we're going to be talking about this evening, The Rational Optimist, is a wonderful kind of showcase of this incredible learning, very lightly worn. And it's a tremendous book. I really, really commend it to all of you. It has this terrific sweep through all of human history, from kind of stone axe head to the optical mouse. And it gives you tremendous insights into all kinds of different fields. And why I found, perhaps given the name of this organisation, most uplifting or inspiring was it turns out that exchange of ideas turns out to be the driving force, not just of this organisation, but of all human history, in your account, which is extremely flattering to us, if nothing else. Matt is going to talk to us this evening and present. He's going to, in fact, show you a short movie, I think, at the start of his presentation, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers. But without any further ado from me, Matt, it's over to you. Thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you, Neil, very much indeed for that kind introduction. Woody Allen once said that mankind stands at a crossroads. One road leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray we have the wisdom to make the right choice. And that's the attitude that I think pervades nearly everything we think about the future. I think it's wrong. I'm going to just start with, it's not really a movie, but it's a sort of moving graph, which I rather like. Well, there's a couple of them, but the first one here is a graph, there's a lot of little dots on it. I don't know if you can see it, there's a lot of little dots down in the left-hand corner. Each of those dots is a country. The size of the dot represents the size of the population. Orange dots are Europe, blue dots are Africa, red dots are Asia, yellow dots are America, and so on. And that's the situation in 1800. On the bottom is income per person, GDP per capita adjusted for inflation. And on the left-hand side is life expectancy at birth. So that's how long you expect to live. So people earn between sort of $300 and $3,000 dollars per capita in 1990 dollars in those days. And they expected to live between 25 and 40 years, roughly speaking, in 1800. And I just want you to watch what happens over the next, this is essentially a movie of the Industrial Revolution, over the next 200 years. The two countries at the top right-hand corner are Britain and the Netherlands there, the richest and most long-lived of the countries at that time. And so it's moving now. You can see the dates scrolling by on the graph, and you can see some of the European countries starting to move out towards the top right here in the 19th century, but not very fast, and nearly everybody's kind of stuck. There's not a lot of movement, but suddenly America, the bright yellow dot, is joined up with some of the European countries. People are getting much longer lived now in the early 20th century in Europe, but not anywhere else. By the 1940s, 50s, which is where we are now, we've got a third world, the first world, one lot of long-lived countries. Now we're moving into the 70s and 80s. Everybody's piling up into the top right-hand corner. Watch China zooming to the right there, the big red dot, and that's 2009. I don't know if you saw it, but some of the blue countries, these ones, dropped out of the pack. That's the AIDS epidemic. That's the reduction in life expectancy with AIDS. Now, the question I want you to ask yourself is that going to stop in the next 100 years, or is it going to go on? I think it's probably quite likely that we haven't seen the end of that. And it is an extraordinary transformation, not just of the West, but of everybody, except Africa, which is still left behind. Although even that has improved, particularly on the life expectancy. Now, here's another one showing the demographic transition, that is to say the reduction in the number of children each woman has over the same kind of period. To start with, there's only very few dots on it because we haven't got enough data, but that's Sweden, that single dot you can see there in 1800. Along the bottom is infant mortality. So Sweden's infant mortality at that stage was over 200 per 1,000 births. So of every 1,000 babies born, 200 were expected to die. And on the left is the number of children per woman, and it's about 4. So most of the European countries start around there. So 1/5 of children are going to die, and each woman is going to have about 4 or 5 children. And as nothing much happens in the 19th century. Not a lot of data yet. Here's most of the European data starting to come in, just European countries so far. They're bottling around with 4 or 5 children and a lot of deaths, 200 deaths per 1,000 roughly. But as the 20th century dawns, you start to see some changes. You start to see reducing birth rates and reducing child mortalities happen in the European countries. Now the rest of the world has come in, it's still got there. Now watch everybody's birth rates collapse as we go through we're in the 90s, the 2000s now. Only Africa still hasn't done it. Again, ask yourself, is that going to stop, or is Africa going to follow the rest of the world down into the bottom left-hand corner? That, I think, is a way of setting up just how spectacularly the world has changed. And yet, as I say, I listen to a lot of people, environmentalists, politicians, and everybody, make out that they're very, very worried about the future. And I'm not. I think the future is going to be extraordinarily exciting. Now, bad things are going to happen, but here's some of the stuff that's happening. This is a picture of London. I took it out of an aeroplane window about 10 days ago. London has more people in it than ever before, and yet they're richer, they're cleaner, and they're safer than ever before. Is it possible for that to happen to the planet? How much longer can it go on happening that the planet can get more populous and yet cleaner and safer and richer at the same time? We all think that at some point that's got to come to an end. But why tomorrow? Why next decade? Might it be 100 years? Might it be 1,000 years? Might it be 5,000 years before we run into the barriers? That's the question I want to ask. And so, that's world product. That's the value of the goods and services we've produced in the world since the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of that is increasing human population. But if you divide it by population, that's world GDP per capita since the year 0, you can see that it's been going on pretty well forever, although it accelerated dramatically around 1800. How is it that we're able to get so much richer as we got more numerous? And by the way, we're in a recession. We're in a horrible recession. It's not a great time. I'm talking on a day when everybody's very gloomy about the world. But they're not gloomy about the world. They're gloomy about Western Europe and America and these kind of places. China's growing like gangbusters. And even America, that's America's Great Recession, that little dip at the top right. It's already bounced back. It's already on the way up again. So yes, there are terrible things happening to the value of assets, which hurts countries that have borrowed and things like that. But the process of exchange and specialization that produces human prosperity is continuing somewhere in the world. And we're simply going to get our share of it if we get our policy right. So how is it that as we get more numerous, we live longer? We live 30% longer than we did when I was born, on average, around the world. How is it that as we get more numerous, we're less likely to kill each other? That's the homicide rate in Europe per 100,000 since 1300. How is it that as we get more numerous, we give more to charity, not less? That's donations to charity since 1980. How is it that as we get more numerous, we're less likely to die of waterborne diseases? How is it that as we get more numerous, we're less likely to die from accidents and heart disease and even cancer if you correct for aging? And yet, we were told by environmentalists that this wasn't possible. They said that US life expectancy will drop to 42 years by the end of the century due to cancer epidemics caused by chemicals in the environment. That's the kind of thing people were saying. It wasn't true. In fact, cancer retreated. How is it that we're able to produce less pollution as we get more numerous? This is air pollution. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth by half. Not true. It was the pollution that halved, not the sunlight. How is it that as we get more numerous, we find more resources, not less? This is world crude oil production. Remember, Jimmy Carter said we could use up all the proven reserves of oil in the entire world by the end of the next decade, in 1976. How is it that as we get more numerous, we produce more food per capita and more food from the same acreage, even though the environmentalists assured us that we couldn't do it. Farmers can no longer keep up with rising demand for food and famine is inevitable, said Lester Brown in 1974. How is it that the more of us there are, the less poverty there is in the world? This is the latest estimate of people living on less than a $1990 a day, adjusted for inflation. And yet, The Rio Declaration in 1992 said, as a matter of fact, signed by the world leaders, that we are confronted with a worsening of poverty. No, we aren't. Even in Africa, poverty is starting to go down now. It wasn't for several decades, but it is now. How is it that as we get more numerous, we become more equal? Yes, we do. Inequality is not increasing globally. It's going down. That's inequality. It has to be going down. The Chinese are getting richer faster than the Americans are getting richer. That's bound to reduce inequality. Even though the Rio Declaration said we are confronted with a perpetuation of disparities between and within nations. Well, that's a bunch of graphs to try and persuade you that even though a bad future may be around the corner, it doesn't look like it's on us yet, despite the fact that we're supposed to be running into ecological limits. But if we're going to understand when that process is going to come to an end, what the buffers are that we're going to hit, then we have to understand what that process of prosperity is. And I'm very naively coming into economics as a non-economist trained, as a biologist. I'm simply asking the question, what is prosperity, to try and understand it. And in the end, of course, it all comes back to technology. Here's a technology. This is an Australian hand axe from 500,000 years ago. And here's another technology. Both of these sit on my desk at home. This is a computer mouse from 5 years ago. They're exactly the same size and shape. That's not very interesting, because it means they were both designed for the human hand. There are two interesting things about the differences between them, though. One is that the axe was made to the same design for roughly 1 million years. We didn't have innovation in the time of Homo erectus. Technology changed more slowly than skeletons in those days, whereas the mouse is obsolete after 5 years. The other thing is that the axe is made from one substance. It's just one thing. The mouse is a confection of different substances, plastic and metal and silicon and so on. And more than that, it's a confection of different ideas. Ideas have come together, the idea of plastic, the idea of computing, the idea of semiconductors and so on, to make a mouse. And I think that is the secret of understanding how we go from self-sufficient subsistence to something we might call prosperity. My body is a confection of different ideas too, different genetic ideas, the idea of skin, the idea of nerve cells, the idea of limbs and things like that. And how does evolution do confection, do cumulative things like that? Well, it uses something called sex. Without sex, without exchange of genes, you can't bring together different genetic ideas and put them on the same team. Essentially, look, here's an example. 2 different mutations in an asexual species. They're both good ideas, a green one and a red one. The green one's better, the red one has to go extinct. But in a sexual species, at some point, an individual inherits both mutations. So, let's say it's mammary glands in mammals or fur in mammals. You bring them together and you say, actually, I like both those. Yeah, sorry. Didn't come out quite right. So, what's the process in human cultural evolution that's equivalent to sex in biology? That's the question I really want to ask ourselves. Because culture itself doesn't cut it, because we know a lot of other animals have culture. Chimpanzees famously have culture. They pass on traditions to their offspring, but they have a kind of asexual culture because they never exchange ideas between groups. And that's the point, it's exchange. The human invention of exchange had an extraordinary accelerant effect on our culture. It was like throwing fuel on the flames. So that the habit of swapping one thing for another was what triggered the takeoff of human prosperity, and it's what continues to take off, to trigger the takeoff of human prosperity today. All technologies, when you think about them, come about by the combination of different ideas. It's very rare to find a technology that's completely standalone. It comes about from recombining different ideas. The pill camera is my favorite example. It came about after a conversation between a gastroenterologist and a guided missile designer. But what's all this got to do with making our lives better? Well, the point about technology is it enables us to do things more cheaply. So it enables us to get hold of minerals more cheaply. This is a decline in the price of metals over the last 200 years. And how does technology enable you to get things more cheaply? Well, it's all about time, I think. It's not about money, it's about time. It's about how long you take to fulfill your needs or your desires. Ask yourself this question: how long does it take you to earn an hour of reading light? You're going to go home tonight and you're going to read my book for an hour by artificial light, an 18-watt compact fluorescent bulb burning for an hour. How long did you have to work today to earn that electricity plus the amortized value of the bulb and all that kind of thing? And the answer is about half a second if you're on the average US or indeed UK. I worked it out again the other day for the UK, and it's about a quarter of a second at the moment. It's actually come down a bit. So that's how long you have to work to earn that much light. Compare that with how long it would take you to acquire that much light if you did it by self-sufficiency. You went out into the countryside, you killed a sheep, you got the fat out, you rendered it down, you made a candle, you put a wick in, etc. It's going to take rather more than half a second. Back in 1950, on the average wage, you would have had to work for about 8 seconds to earn that much light. And that's economic growth. That's what it is. You've got 7.5 seconds now in your life that you can spend fulfilling a different need, because you don't need to spend it earning the right to turn on your light. In 1880, with a kerosene lamp, you'd have had to work for 15 minutes to earn that much light, on the average wage. The key is the average wage at the time. And in 1800, for 6 hours. The average American or Brit in 1800 could not afford a candle. So when you see those Jane Austen adaptations, and they're all dancing in Meryton assembly rooms in front of 500 candles, didn't happen very often, or at least didn't happen for very many people. And this, of course, this is just Moore's law, you know, the cheapening of semiconductors, etc., in a different form. And this has happened for lots of other technologies when you think about it. It's all about the reduction in the time you have to spend to acquire it. So how do we acquire things in a shorter time? In the end, it all goes back to David Ricardo's comparative advantage. Of course, what David Ricardo said was that it's worth England importing things from Portugal, even if it's better at making everything than Portugal. Those were the days. But I'm going to retell the story here in Stone Age terms, because I think it's illuminating. We've got two guys sitting around a fire. They both want to go hunting with a spear and an axe. Adam is rather slow at making both spears and axes. Oz is quicker at making spears and axes. But Oz is quicker at spears than axes, whereas Adam is quicker at axes than spears. So does Oz need Adam? He doesn't. He can just make his own spears and axes and get off hunting before Oz has finished clearing his throat, before Adam has finished clearing his throat. Sorry, Adam, this isn't picking on you. But if Oz makes 2 spears and Adam makes 2 axes, and they trade, then they would each have saved 1 hour of work. And the point is, the more they do this, the more true it's going to be that they save time, because the better Oz is going to get at making spears, and the better Adam is going to get at making axes. So specialization and exchange feed upon each other. They actually reinforce each other. And that can play out gradually increasing the rewards to specialization. I'm just restating what Adam Smith said, really, and refined by David Ricardo. But I think it's quite helpful. Because if you go back and look at this image again and you ask, who made the axe? The answer is Homo erectus made it for himself. We can actually find places, there's Boxgrove in Sussex is a place where you can find where they made some Australian hand axes to butcher a horse, and you can see that each guy sat down and butchered it and made his own hand axe. You can see the shadow of his legs on the ground from where the chips fell from the block he was chipping and so on. But I didn't make that mouse. It's mine, but I didn't make it. It was made for me by other people, very kindly. They all got together and decided one day they were going to make me a computer mouse. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, in fact probably millions of them, because you've got to include the guy on the coffee farm in Brazil who was growing the coffee that was going to be drunk by the oil rig worker in the Gulf of Mexico who was drilling for oil, whose oil was going to be made into the plastic, etc., etc., etc. We've gradually moved away as a species from self-sufficiency towards getting other people to do things for us, towards exchanging our specialized labor for our diversified consumption, getting more and more specialized as producers so that we can be more and more diversified as consumers. Now, in the old days, you got rich by having people working for you in that same way. Louis XIV had a lot of people working for him. It's a fair bet he didn't make that silly outfit for himself. Louis XIV had 498 people to prepare his dinner every night. But here's a bunch of tourists in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles going around Louis XIV's palace, and each of them has 498 people to prepare his dinner tonight. They're in bistros and cafes and restaurants and shops all over Paris, but at an hour's notice they're prepared to produce a meal that's more likely to have mangoes in it and less likely to have salmonella in it than Louis XIV had. What's the difference from the point of view of the consumer? Now, other animals do work for each other. It's not unique to find animals working for each other in this way. But there's a big difference. The other examples really all come from social animals, particularly social insects. This is a worker ant and a queen ant. The worker's feeding the queen. And obviously workers and queens work for each other within the ant colony. The difference is that it's always within the colony. Basically, it's within the giant family that an ant colony is. And why is that? Because they have one division of labour that we don't have. It's the reproductive division of labour. That is to say, they devolve reproduction to a specialised caste. That's the one thing we don't like to devolve, to delegate. We'd rather insist on doing it for ourselves. As I say when I'm in America, even in England, we don't expect the Queen to do reproduction for us. And of course that means that we work for strangers. Whereas this phenomenon, which has produced something that looks very like prosperity in a lot of species of social insects, remains confined within families of insects. And when you think about it, we not only work for strangers, we work for other species too. You know, we work for wheat, we work for sheep, we work for dogs, and they work for us. Here's three species working for each other: the shepherd, the sheep, and the dog, all working for each other. So when did we start working for each other, and how? This is some of the very, very earliest evidence for trade, for exchange. These are shell beads found in Algeria by a team from Oxford. They're marine shells, and the key point is that they're 125 miles inland. Artifacts don't move distances that long by migration, by people carrying them. They move by trade. I'll give you a reason why. They date from somewhere between 80,000 and 120,000 years ago. And around the same time in Ethiopia, you see obsidian tools and jasper objects start to move long distances in Ethiopia too. So something's stirring sometime around then. It's a hugely vague time frame, admittedly. Sometime around 100,000 years ago, we've somehow stumbled upon the habit of saying, I've got some of this, you've got some of that, let's swap. No other animal does this. Chimpanzees can't even get the hang of it in the laboratory. They've been taught, but it only works if there's a human intermediary between them. They can't get the idea of giving up something they like for something they would like even more. It just doesn't click with them. As Adam Smith famously said, no man ever saw a dog make fair exchange of a bone with another dog. Here's the evidence as to why long-distance travel of artifacts means trade. You can look at modern hunter-gatherers like Aboriginals in Australia. There's a quarry called Mount Isa, which is in central Australia. It was controlled by a tribe called the Kalkadoon tribe. They swapped these things for what their neighbours had, which was often things like stingray barbs from the coast and so on. And there was trade networks, and you can even trace rates of exchange of stone axes for stingray barbs and things like that. And the point is that Mount Isa stone axes end up all over Australia in a huge range, far larger than the range of the Kalkadoon tribe. That's a signature of trade happening. And it doesn't happen till around 100,000 years ago, and it never happens to the Neanderthals, even though they lived till 30,000 years ago. You never find Neanderthal objects moving long distances. So somehow this clicked in we Africans, because we are Africans, all of us. At least 96% of us. 96% of each of us. In the Pacific, before Western contact, fishing technology, which has been studied now by archaeologists, was more sophisticated on islands with bigger populations. And it was more sophisticated on islands with more contact with other islands. So it's not just, so either you had a big population or you were in contact with a large population. And that determined how sophisticated your fishing technology was. And when you think about it, that's really very interesting. It's telling you that there's something collective going on in inventiveness, that it's not a phenomenon that depends on just having, a bright person on the island. It depends on having enough people doing enough specializing and enough exchanging to produce a sort of collective intelligence like this. It's a collective brain. And curiously, it even goes into reverse. Tasmania became an island 10,000 years ago when sea level rose at the end of the Ice Age. And about 4,000 Aboriginals were cut off on the island. And they lived there for the next 10,000 years quite happily, chasing wallabies and things like that. But not only did their technology fail to advance as rapidly as mainland Aboriginals, it actually retreated. They gave up a number of technologies, a number of tools during the next 10,000 years. They gave up the ability to make bone tools, they gave up the ability to make clothing, they gave up the ability to make fishing tackle. Now, this has been modelled mathematically to try and understand what was going on by Joe Henry, and he's come to the conclusion that what's going on here is simply that surprisingly enough, 4,000 is not enough to sustain the specialised skills, the specialisation, the differentiation, and the exchange networks to keep these kind of skills alive. That actually the collective brain is too small. Nothing wrong with the individual brains. We're not saying they got stupid, we're just saying their collective brain got small. And by the way, there's a control example, Tierra del Fuego, similar island, just as inhospitable, and yet no regression of technology. Why not? Because the Magellan Strait is a lot narrower than the Bass Strait, and so there was trading contact between Fuegian Indians and mainland South American Indians throughout that 10,000 years. So go back to this image of the axe and the mouse and ask yourself not just who made the mouse, but who knew how to make a mouse? The answer is nobody. There is no single person on the planet who knows how to make a computer mouse. I mean that quite literally. The president of the computer mouse company doesn't know how to make a computer mouse, he just knows how to run a company. The person working on the assembly line doesn't know how to make it, he doesn't know how to drill an oil well to get the oil to make plastic, etc. The knowledge is shared collectively. I'm of course quoting from the famous essay by the economist Leonard Read in 1958, I Pencil, in which a pencil tries to work out where it came from and concludes that nobody knew how to make it, because literally nobody has the individual knowledge to make it. So what's going on here is we've created a collective brain that is capable of doing far more than our own individual brains can do. We've transcended the ability of our own individual brain. And by the way, this is why I've never been interested, I now realise, in arguments about IQ, whether some races have higher IQ than others. That's not what counts. 100 stupid people who are talking to each other can achieve far more than 100 clever people who are not, essentially. That's a map of the internet. And the implication of what I'm saying is that if people are connecting their brains together and exchanging ideas, allowing their ideas to have sex, to use that phrase, as never before because of the internet. Someone in China can share an idea with someone in California, instantaneously rather than waiting for a ship to go backwards and forwards. Then that must be accelerating the rate of innovation. We're all on one big Pacific island now. We're all connected, and so the rate of innovation is bound to go up. But not only that, we've actually now networked our computers, just like human brains. Computers were isolated things that were self-sufficient in terms of their own intelligence in the 1980s. They're not now. They're now all as intelligent as the net that they can contact, that they can connect with. And so it is inconceivable to me that the rate of innovation of technologies, which is what creates that time saving that gives us greater prosperity, is not increasing at the moment. And that therefore we should not be, it's inconceivable to me that we're not going to see an acceleration rather than a deceleration of prosperity in the 21st century, because the limiting factor in the end is the supply of ideas, not the supply of raw materials. Here's what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projects for the next century in terms of GDP per capita. And they do this to try and work out how much carbon dioxide we're going to be putting out over the next century. And at the moment we're down there at the bottom left. And that's where we get to if we continued at the rate we have for the last 50 years. In 2100, the average citizen of the planet would be 10 times as rich as he is today. It's an almost unimaginable thought. Imagine taking your salary and multiplying by 10. In real terms, I'm not talking about inflation, I'm talking about in real terms. Imagine every African doing that, every Chinese, every South American, and so on. And that is the trajectory we're on. And I just told you that I find it inconceivable that we're not actually going to beat that, that we're actually going to come in above that rate. Why, is there a constraint from natural constraints, from resources, from the amount of land, from the amount of air, from the amount of pollution, etc.? I don't think there is. Just take this question. How much land do we need to feed each person? If we were hunter-gatherers, we need 1,000 hectares each. Basically, you need a Hyde Park per person to feed people. When we invented slash and burn agriculture, we discovered that we could feed people off 10 hectares each. By the 1950s, we were feeding people off 4,000 square meters. Today, we're feeding people off roughly 1,250 square meters each. And so, with the world population falling and the amount of land we need to feed people falling, that constraint, the land constraint, is going to get a lot easier. So we're going to be 9 billion people when the population peaks, according to the UN median projection, in around 2075. 9.2 billion is the median projection. How much land are we going to need at that point to feed 9 billion people? Well, at the moment we crop about 15 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Russia. So let's add 2 billion people. We're going to need more land. Let's go organic to see how that works. Whoops, we need a lot more land if we go organic. That's not a good idea. Let's go back on that. And then let's treble yields, because that's what we did in the last 50 years. And there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't do so again with genetics, and fertilizer and pesticides. We would actually end up needing less land to feed more people in 2070 than we do today. I think that's a rather remarkable thought, and it gives you an example. I could run through lots of other examples of how these ecological constraints are not necessarily going to prove to be constraints. So, what I've argued is that it was exchange that triggered our ability to go from making things like this to making things like this. And if I could end with a quotation in which means we cannot absolutely prove that those are in error who say society has reached a turning point, that we have seen our best days. But so said all who came before us, and with just as much apparent reason. On what principle is it that with nothing but improvement behind us, we are to expect nothing but deterioration before us? Well, that was said by Macaulay in 1830. He was already fed up with people saying it can't get better. It's got a lot better since then. And I thought I would just end, though, by I've talked about exchange. I haven't talked about policy, and you are called policy exchange. So here in the most ludicrous, literally back of the envelope fashion, I'm going to throw out some policies from what I've said, which is utterly hubristic and foolish, but there you go. But they're quite simple and they're rather vague. First of all, be open. Prosperity is going to happen, and our best chance of sharing in it is to be open to the world, to be open to the exchange of ideas that causes it. Second, turn up the contrast knob on people, because specialization is what produces prosperity, not everybody doing the same thing. Third, never try to grow by making things more expensive, especially energy, Mr. Hugh, if you're listening. It doesn't work. Fourthly, self-sufficiency has been on the decline for 100,000 years. Nowadays we call it poverty. Don't fight it. It's good to collaborate with others. It's not a bad thing. And fifthly, I'm not saying don't worry, be happy, but I am saying don't despair, be ambitious. Thank you very much.
Brilliant stuff. I'm sure you all have masses of questions, and we do have some time now for a discussion. I thought just to kick this off, one thing that came to me reading your book is trying to understand why we go through these phases of kind of pessimism and optimism about the future, because on the intellectual changes of the last 30 years, for example, Paul Romer was here a while ago, all his ideas point towards increased possibilities. The economics of agglomeration, everything we've learned there in the last 30 years, that all points in the direction that you've been talking about. And yet it seems like we're living through a period of kind of eco-pessimism, kind of nostalgia for the earth, this kind of stuff. It's just kind of me, undriven kind of cultural shifts that come and go. Is there any particular reason you think culture's become more or less pessimistic about the future over time with demographics?
Well, I don't think it has. I used to think that. I used to think this thing went in cycles, and that if you go back to the 19th century, everyone's, can-do progressives, etc. And I think certainly there's a little bit of a geographical difference. On the whole, you find can-do progressives in China. You don't find them in Europe so much these days. But on the whole, what has amazed me is going back and discovering that people have always been pessimistic about the future. The best-selling books in the 1890s were all frightful, moaning laments about how the race was deteriorating and urbanization was producing an underclass that was never going to escape from the slums and then so I thought, well, okay, well then maybe I haven't gone back far enough. So I went back to 1800 and found a Macaulay quote, etc. And I went back to the 18th century, etc., etc. And eventually I got back to the poet Hesiod, who lived in, what was it, the 9th century BC? Anybody help me there? I.e. in the Golden Age. And Hesiod's saying, things ain't what they used to be. Things in the Golden Age. So I think there's always been nostalgia and there's always been pessimism. Now, okay, there've also been sunny optimists like me in every period too, and it's maybe sometimes we've had a bit more of the upper hand, but I don't any longer see it as a cyclical thing. I think it's kind of always been there. And why is it there? It kind of makes sense to be pessimistic, I suppose, in the Stone Age. So it might be part of our nature. If you and I are walking to a waterhole and I say there's a lion behind that rock, I think I wouldn't go that way if I were you. You say, no, I'm sure it'll all be fine, then you're dead and my genes are in the next generation. So my cautious genes spread at the expense of your optimistic. But that's flippant.
Brilliant. If you've got questions, if you could put your hands up, there's a microphone coming around as well. You can just say who you are away from. It's a gentleman in the very front row as well.
Chris Hamlin, King's College, London. Just an easy lob first question. When you're talking about food and population relationship right near the end, and you're suggesting in fact that the amount of land required could actually shrink, the thing you don't really take into account is that people's diets change. Yep. And you know all of this. I mean, as China gets more prosperous, it wants more meat, more pigs, more cattle. That requires more grain and arguably more land. So how do you deal with that?
Well, you put that very well, and you're right. I don't think, as it were, we're going to release that land for wilderness, or at least not all of it. Although I think we might be able to release some of it for wilderness. Because even here in the West, and even in China, we're also moving, we're eating less beef and more chicken. Now, a chicken is roughly, you need roughly 3 times as much grain to feed a chicken as you get energy out of the chicken when you eat it, roughly speaking. It's the 3-to-1 ratio in a chicken. It's about 5-to-1 in a pig, and it's about 10-to-1 in a cow. Cows are actually remarkably inefficient. So if we eat more chickens and less cows, we're also going to cut down the amount of land we eat. And that's been the trend of the last few decades, that we're eating more chickens and less cows. But at the same time, you're right, the Chinese are going to eat more chickens and more cows, as it were, and less rice. But I don't myself see why we can't make that, we can't tweak those efficiency factors. Pigs are quite wasteful eaters because they can't handle phosphates in food well. And so you change the biochemistry of a pig a bit and you up its efficiency, etc. So there are going to be those trends going on in animals too, is really what I'm saying. But yeah, you're right, we're not going to get all that land back to hand over to the World Wildlife Fund. A lot of it will be used for making luxuries making golf courses as well as making cattle farms, if you see what I mean. But my point is simply that the constraint is not there. But yeah, you're dead right about the general point.
Two questions in the back row. We'll take the gentleman in the aisle first.
Hi, firstly, just want to say great talk, also great book. I found the Rational Optimist account of human progress accelerating, driven by exchange, very compelling. I wonder though if you weren't perhaps being a little bit irrationally pessimistic about the impacts of the break on progress that climate mitigation could present. I think at the start of chapter 10 you talked about a steep decline in living standards was a risk of our mitigation efforts. Just to put the worst projections of Nicholas Stern into context, Adair Turner looked at what this could mean in terms of how great a delay to our economic progress that would represent as of 2050. He found it would slow the growth of the economy by 2.5 to 3 times globally by only a year. So I didn't. That doesn't strike me as an extremely steep decline in living standards.
Yeah, the fact it's great to be accused of irrational pessimism. Thank you. Can I have that on the cover? Because most people are kind of thinking I'm the opposite. You're right that it could turn out that decarbonising the economy would be a heck of a lot cheaper than it looks at the moment. But I look at what we're doing, the first things we've done in the name of climate mitigation, the main thing we've done first is biofuels. Biofuels is a catastrophic policy. It means we've taken huge chunks of the earth that were growing food and turned them into growing fuel instead, with a roughly 1-to-1 output. You put just about as much diesel into growing stuff as you get out on fuel. We've caused spikes in food prices that have caused real hunger in places. We've encouraged the destruction of rainforest in Borneo that orangutans live in, etc., etc. So and by the way, we haven't saved any carbon emissions because biofuels are still carbon. It doesn't matter whether you grew it or not; it's still going back into the atmosphere. So I just want to rebalance the debate a little bit to say. Remember, there are huge costs as well to rushing through bad technologies that produce the wrong results and that don't help. Now, you could be right, or let's say I could be right, because I agree with you, that at some point we're going to decarbonise, and I think we're probably going to do so pretty efficiently. Actually, if you look at the graph of carbon atoms burnt per unit of what's the word? GDP. Yeah, I think it's on an amazingly steep, steady decline. And so, for example, actually, I've got a piece of the Times saying this tomorrow. A dash for gas is a great idea because it gets us to from carbon-rich coal to less carbon-rich gas very quickly and very cheaply, and on a great scale. Because the trouble with wind and things is they can't boil a kettle. You can actually do some good here, and that if we say we don't like that because it's still got some carbon in it, then we're making the best the enemy of the good. So I'm arguing for some policies that help to mitigate carbon, but I'm not convinced that we might not end up rushing into inefficient, low carbon technologies when it turns out that climate change isn't such a rapid or urgent threat after all. In other words, we might end up putting a tourniquet around our neck to stop a nosebleed, as I put it. So that's a huge subject, and I haven't done it justice, and you make a good point, but there's my first answer.
There was another question in that back row, and then we'll come to
Matthew Sinclair from the Taxpayers Alliance. One thing about the chickens and pigs and cows, of course, we also get more efficient chickens, pigs and cows. Like more efficient horses were one of the biggest transport innovations of the Industrial Revolution. But one of the, there's some great papers on that in economic history, but one of the questions I had was, what do you see as the biggest pitfalls, it relates, I guess, to the last question, biggest pitfalls, the biggest risks which could unsettle, after we're thinking about policy here, which could unsettle this progress that we have seen, and which, as you say, we can reasonably expect to continue to see if something doesn't go wrong?
Two words. I mean, there are lots, but I'll choose two. And yeah, it's 3 in the morning. I'm a pessimist about quite a lot of things, and I can be pretty pessimistic about these two words. One is mysticism, and the other is bureaucracy. In other words, if you look at what's set back this progress engine in times past, it's a form of predation often. It's a form of people saying, actually I can make more money by stealing it off people, either as a king or as a thief or as a priest, than I can by exchanging with people. And all the people we admire in history, they all did this. They didn't live off exchange, they just lived off plunder, basically, Julius Caesar onwards. And at times that got the upper hand. And the fall of the Roman Empire, to me, is all about, which, by the way, the fall of the Roman Empire is a story about retreating to self-sufficiency on a grand scale. And what presaged that? Well, basically, a bunch of predators in Rome who thought that they could live high on the hog of other people's efforts. Now, admittedly, I don't think a modern civil servant is in the same category as Pol Pot and Julius Caesar, but there's an element of parasitism about the growth of bureaucracy that does bother me. Okay, question. That's answer number one. What about mysticism? Well, I do think that there is a tendency to shut down rational, open inquiry that goes on in some of these periods too. If you look at the way Islam turned its back on open-minded, scientific, pro-business, pro-trade attitudes in around 1100 AD. And if you look at the way China did the same under the Ming Empire, and you then say, could that happen now because we're so connected? Could that happen globally? Could some regime take over that had some religious idea in its head that said it didn't, that was really anti-commerce as well as anti-reason? This time it could take over the whole world rather than just one country. I can't quite rule that out in my own head, but I think it's pretty unlikely. Anyway, those are the things that worry me most.
That's a question from one of our trustees at the end of the
Yes, Richard Owen, I'm a trustee of Policy Exchange. Over the next 30 or so years, Europe is going to age very rapidly and dramatically in a way that no advanced society ever has before, though Japan's a bit ahead of us on this. How big a drag do you think that's going to be on future growth, and could it actually cancel it out altogether?
I think you're absolutely right, Richard. I think it is. I think it's one of the biggest issues, and I perhaps should have brought it up in response to Matthew's question, because I do, not just Europe, but Japan too, are going to be in uncharted territory here. Not only have we got the sort of simple arithmetic problem of how do you pay for a lot of old people with a relatively small working age population, but we've also got the increased neophobia that comes with an average age increase. In other words, people being anti-innovation, anti-change, anti-experiment. I'm not saying everybody over 50 is like this, but we all know we've got a tendency to become grumpy old men as we get older. I certainly know. It's hard to imagine the sort of entrepreneurial vigor of Silicon Valley being sustained if America's average age shoots up because it shuts down the immigration valve and lowers its birth rate. It's not going to happen to America nearly as fast as Europe, as you know. That said, I think if you look at Japan over the last 20 years, it can't grow. It can't achieve the rates of growth it used to. Whatever it tries doesn't work, and that I suspect there's a bit of a demographic factor going on there. And yet, life's not that bad for the Japanese. countries, they're one of the richest countries on the earth, etc. And they're able to benefit from the fact that somewhere else on the planet there's innovation going on. At the moment it's China and India and so on. But as long as we stay open, it doesn't matter if we're the ones doing the innovation. We can still get the products and the ideas from other people. It's just that we can't lead the process. And I'm absolutely sure that Europe will, in relative terms, decline over the next century. I just think in absolute terms it'll creep upwards. Hopefully a bit faster than Argentina did in the 20th century, but Argentina didn't decline in absolute terms, it declined rapidly in relative terms. That's for different reasons. But, so yeah, I think that demography is very important. And when we get to the point where the whole world population is shrinking sometime around 2075, and even Africans are looking quite elderly, yeah, it could be tricky to keep the trip going. I don't know.
Sorry, I mean, it's a gentleman in the back row. Sorry.
Matt, isn't one of the isn't one of the reasons for optimism the gradual decline in influence of the Greens, those wonderful organisations, Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, which have been wrong on just about every single major issue we've faced. And the precautionary principle, which is now enshrined in different international agreements, is one of the main obstacles to a more rational approach to the problems we face. I mean, isn't it about time that we recognise that this wonderful sort of bowing down in the faces of the wonderful virtues of the prime exponents of the Green movement is one of the disasters of recent times?
I'm afraid I agree. I think, I was a student in the 1970s. The grown-ups told me that, and they all told me this, there was no exception. They told me the future was bleak, that the population explosion was unstoppable, famine was inevitable, acid rain was going to kill all the forests, my sperm counts were going to fall. I could go on and on and on. Nobody ever said, actually, your own country, even your benighted little England, is going to see a near doubling of GDP per capita in the next 30 years. So I do think that, and a lot of that came out of the environmental movement, you're right. I don't quite share your optimism that they're on the back foot permanently now. Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and World Wildlife Fund, globally, have a budget, an annual budget of over $1 billion. They don't, unlike Exxon, they don't have to spend that on products. They can spend it purely on promotion of ideas. It's a heck of a megaphone, and it works very, very well. So I do think that they've got a lot of power still.
There was a gentleman.
That brought a lot of hands up.
Gentleman we were going to go right in the middle of the back now.
Hi, I'm actually a geneticist originally, so I read your book Genome and Nature by Nurture, and I was really interested when I heard that you were going to go to Northern Rock and move towards business and away from science. But I think it's really interesting. I can hear a helicopter out there just now because of a group of young people who are worried that they're going to be denied the opportunity to share in ideas and to talk to each other. And you've showed in your demonstration tonight that the access to education and ideas and talking to each other is fundamental in the growth and all the optimistic gains that you've displayed here. And the protest that there has its roots in the cuts that are being made and the increases in the cost of education, and the roots in the financial crisis of which Northern Rock was a part. And so I think it's just a really, really appropriate moment to ask, was Northern Rock too optimistic? And are there any lessons that we can learn from Northern Rock?
Well, there's a limit to what I can talk about with respect to Northern Rock specifically, but first point to make is that it was no different to any other bank. I mean, it ended up in exactly the same place as all the other mortgage banks all over the world. There was a collective delusion about where the risk lay in whether it lay in liquidity or credit. We all thought risks lay in credit. It turns out risks lay in liquidity. I made that mistake along with everybody else. I don't think it was, I mean, it certainly wasn't this kind of optimism, because if anything, it was optimism about the value of assets. By the way, I should add that Northern Rock's assets are in great shape. I mean, seriously, if you go and look, the loans are performing fine. The problem was entirely on the funding side, not on the lending side, but that's another point. There was the process of betting that assets are going to go up in value is often infected with mass hysterical optimism that is crazy. I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago. I say it now. I've had a ringside seat, so have we all. Now, you know, and I go back and look at the South Sea bubble and, you know, etc. We've been doing this. We can't stop these bubbles and crashes happening in asset markets. They don't happen in goods and services for consumption markets. You know, there hasn't been a toothpaste bubble. You know, there's this process that I've been talking about today, which is the stuff that actually raises real living standards, has been bubbling along fine and continues to bubble along fine. But the problem is, we in the West borrowed a lot of cheap money off the Chinese who had it and blew it on a speculative asset bubble which could not be sustained. And yes, there was an element of irrational optimism in that, I would agree. I don't know if, of course, that doesn't fully answer your question, but it's a start.
I should take a question from my boss in the very back row.
Charles Moore, Policy Exchange. Matt, thank you very much. Everything you say about how people have got it wrong and your principal exchange seems utterly convincing and brilliant. But when you talk about improvement...
I thought there was a butt coming.
What? Improvement for whom? I mean, when we think about human beings, I think most of us would morally agree that we have a different idea about them from other creatures, because we don't only think about the welfare of the species, but the welfare of each person. And one of the reasons that people get annoyed with liberal economics and what I think one pope called satanic optimism is that it tends to exclude all those. It tends not to have much to say to all those who fail. And if you think of the period since Macaulay has spoken, there have been the most appalling examples of mass suffering, often caused by human beings, in which millions of people have suffered sort of even more, if it's possible, than they did in the past. And that's not, it seems to me, going to go away, is it? There isn't a sort of rational optimist solution to everything about human behaviour, which means that we're just going to stop killing one another and so on. Or perhaps you think that there is. Do you see, there's a sort of, everything's right in a very important way of what you say, and yet there's something missing.
Steve Pinker has just finished an 800-page book on the decline of violence, and he was showing some slides about this last week in Mexico, and one of them showed that the 2000s, the decade from 2000 to 2010, was the one with the least deaths in war, both in number and in percentage, in recorded history. It's hard for us to believe, because we've been in wars in most of that decade, whereas we weren't in previous ones. But actually, if you count civil wars, international wars, or every war you can think of, then that, you know, even take a big estimate of the number of people who died in Iraq, it still makes that a very peaceful decade in terms of deaths. Now, that decline has not been, as you rightly point out, steady since Macaulay's time. The 19th century was a pretty peaceful century, the 20th century was a very bloody century. Although it was about a tenth as bloody as it would have been if we were hunter-gatherers. The death toll in war is roughly 10 times what we achieved in the 20th century in ordinary hunter-gatherer societies, surprisingly with machetes and things like that. What caused that lurch into war and slaughter between 1914 and 1950 something? I would argue that it was turning your back on liberal economics. In other words, it was turning to political entrepreneurs rather than commercial entrepreneurs. In other words, people like Hitler, and Mao, and Stalin, rather giving them too much power and allowing them to what's the word I'm looking for? It's no accident that trade got tougher because of protectionism in the 30s, and that helps the rise of the dictators, etc. So a genuine, and as you know, of course there are always, but yes, you're right. I don't think it's going to stop. I don't think war's over. I think there are going to be some horrible decades in the 21st century. I just say they're not going to be as bad as they would have been if we weren't doing exchange and specialization. There are two things. Steve Pinker told me this last week, and I don't know whether it's true. There are probably historians here who can tell me whether it's true or not. There's been an argument going on in history, economic history, for some time between the democratic piece and the capitalist piece argument. In other words, the argument that no two democracies have ever gone to war with each other, and the more you spread democracy, the less war you're going to have. And the argument, on the other hand, that no, it's liberal capitalists who don't go to war with each other, and that Bastiat's famous phrase, when goods cross borders, armies don't. Now, superficially, you look back at history and you say, well, that's crap, because there was a lot of trade in the time before the First World War. But Steve told me last week that the current view is that actually the capitalist piece people are winning, and that the theory that commerce is what reduces the risk of war is actually stronger at the moment than the theory that democracy reduces the risk of war. So, for example, China looks a lot less likely to go to war with America at the moment than I think any of us could possibly have imagined, given how rich it's become over the last few decades. And yet it hasn't become very democratic in that period. So I still think that engaging in commerce is the best way of raising everybody's living standards and reducing everybody's chance of misery and giving everybody as much freedom as well as possible. Now, it isn't going to do everything for everybody, of course, you're right. And that, someone's always going to be able to point out losers, and there are losers in every process. But, when people talk about the people who suffered in the mills in the industrial 19th century, they don't talk about the agricultural workers who died of starvation in the countryside 100 years before. So it's the opportunity cost, whatever horrible expression economists use. Sorry, a rambling answer to a very good question.
It's very reminds us like Paul Collier was here not so long ago talking about his point that developing countries with a shoreline do a hell of a lot better than countries that have got natural resource because they don't get parasite class, but they do trade. And there was a gentleman who's very patient at the front.
Thank you very much. Possibly one reason for being more pessimistic is that your view is so narrowly held. The opposite is the most widely held view. In other words, pessimism seems to be rife and growing. Difficult to judge exactly. But one of the areas I'd point to, and just wondered whether you had a view on this, was you have touched on it, but in the last 50 years, trade, and particularly financial trade, has opened up dramatically and probably contributed to some of those figures that you got on the screen. But the pressure to reverse that now is extremely strong. There's pressure for much less financial activity, taxes, commerce is under pressure, and protectionism is arguably rising. The pressure for protection is rising, and you could argue that organisations such as the EU are essentially protectionist rather than open. So the modern trends might be suggesting that we're going to face political problems on that front. I just wondered if you saw that as a barrier.
Well, I think the 1920s and 1930s are a horrible object lesson. What had been marching along nicely in terms of globalization and commerce and exchange turned in on itself and turned back. And what's the name of that act in America that brought in the tariff? Smoot-Hawley, thank you. Smoot-Hawley is kind of the the threat we're all scared of now, and I think we're probably right to be scared of it. I think, the temptation of protectionism, and the financial industry too, is great. And God, I'm sounding like a pessimist. Well, I think, you talk to an Indian and you rarely get this feeling. You don't get the feeling you can tell them to bring down the shutters again and go back to the Nehru autarkic policies. You don't get the feeling that they're going to let us bring up the tariff barriers or shut them out of financial services. I think that Asia is going to keep us sane in this. I think if Europe doesn't want to play the game anymore, then it's had it. But I don't think the rest of the world is going to let it happen. I don't have huge faith in America in this respect at the moment, but I have more faith in Asia. Is that an answer? I don't know whether it is. So somebody who must know a better answer than that.
Just maybe a couple of questions coming towards it. Gentleman in black right at the back, and then the lady.
Hi, I'm Gordon Connick. I work for a charity called the Princess Royal Trust for Carers. Adam Smith also spoke about the social ills that are a result of increasing specialisation, and another think tank, Centre for Social Justice, just down the road, they talk a lot about broken Britain, and a lot of people think that the progress of capitalisation in Britain, the atomisation of society is linked to this kind of idea of broken society. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on that. Just quickly as well, on the democratic peace theory, I did my thesis on that, and there's been a couple of very small instances of conflict between democracies, but much lower than any other kind of dyad of countries, be it communist versus communist, or fascist, or etc. I also found that within that theory, and I think this relates to your idea that you seem to have a kind of a linear progressive view of history, and that we're all kind of marching towards a better, more progressive future. And people generally think that that will lead towards universal democracy throughout the land, more human rights in places like China, equal rights, etc. I'd just like to get your opinion on whether you think that is the future, or whether you do think that countries their prosperity will continue to increase, will retain the kind of political nature that they currently have, or whether they will progress to democracies as well.
It's a very good question, and my feeling is that commercial success, economic success, does on the whole lead to more freedom, and that it gets harder and harder to put freedom back in the bottle. I also think technology has a big part to play here, because I think that if you look at, I don't think it's any. I tell this story sometimes, and I don't know how significant it is, but the one thing that Oswald Mosley asked his wife to ask Hitler for when she went to see him was money for a radio station. I think radio played an enormous part in the rise of the dictators in the early 20th century. I'm not sure if there's any economic historian who agrees with me on this, it's probably just a nutty theory. But in other words, technologies which are one-to-many, fantastic for a demagogue, radio was. The internet is the very opposite. It's many-to-many. It's incredibly hard to control. It's very hard to use it as a weapon for thought control, as it were. There were more televisions than telephones in East Germany, because they loved television because it was a Big Brother technology, whereas they don't like telephones because it's people talking to each other. So I think technology has been very helpful in helping democracies over the last 50 years. And I'm not at the moment seeing anything that would scare me in that respect, a technology that's come along and going to be helpful to authoritarians as opposed to democrats. Do I think there's a inevitable arrow towards everything getting better? No, of course not. I think countries can go can turn backwards, and whole civilizations can. We've got lots of examples, from the fall of the Roman Empire onwards. I think it's become harder since the Industrial Revolution to throw the clock back, although we had a damn good try in the early 20th century. But we didn't succeed. Living standards didn't fall, actually, in the early 20th century. I mean, if you were killed, obviously they did for you, but for everybody else, they didn't fall. And so, and why is that? Well, I think the spread of invention and specialization and exchange, now that it's boosted by cheap energy, and I think the whole secret of the Industrial Revolution is cheap energy, is just so rewarding that it's easier to get rich that way than to get rich through plunder, or it's easier for people to buy the ability to ward off the plunderers. And so, on the whole, yes, I think things are going to get better. Before that, we kept hitting maybe Malthusian constraints, maybe predator traps, or whatever it was that kept throwing things backwards. But even then, technology was always marching. I think the one thing that does march in an extraordinarily progressive and gradual way is technological improvement, because we invent the adjacent possible. We don't make great leaps. We inch forward in technology. And since 100,000 years ago, technology has been steadily improving, as it were. So that's the arrow-like one. The other stuff jumps around.
Hello, my name's from the Commerce Sector, so I'm very interested in...
From the Commerce Sector?
Yeah, Chloe Meacher from Commerce. I'm very interested in your views. We're globally consuming more, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the potential for mass green consumption to drive better resource use, which is, as you said, driven prosperity. So the potential for mass green consumerism and our ability to use human nature to desire a better life, to actually desire a greener life and switch the desire for a faster car for a greener car. So I'd be interested in whether you're optimistic about mass green consumerism as a solution, given that China is going to want to consume more and you're not going to be able to deny people a better life. And if you are optimistic about mass green consumerism, what's the best way of achieving it? Thank you.
Well, the short answer, the best way of achieving it is going to be to make it cheaper than everything else. People go for things when they get more affordable, not when they get less affordable. So I think that's one of the issues. I don't think it's, human nature being what it is, fast cars and big cars are always going to be desirable because people don't want them not for their practical use, but for their show-off use, as it were. It's all part of, ambition and trying to differentiate yourself. So I think that's always going to be a problem. But if you look at what's happened, the desire to get a better and better performance car has produced an amazing dividend in terms of greenness. The amount of volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides that come out of a modern car are down around 98% on the early 70s per mile travelled. That's why we don't have brown haze in London to anything like the extent that they do in Mexico City, where I was last week, or that they used to have in Los Angeles, etc. That's why it's getting better. So much so that a 2010 Ford Mustang travelling at 70 miles an hour on a freeway emits fewer volatile organic compounds and fewer nitrogen oxides and less carbon monoxide than a 1970 Ford Mustang sitting in a driveway with the engine off. No, sorry, that's only true for volatile organic compounds. It can't be true of nitrogen oxides because they come from combustion, but it's true with the volatile organic compounds, which are a very big part of the ozone problem, etc. So yeah, we are going to get greener as we find ways of becoming more efficient. But I don't think, but there are limits to how much we can force people into expensive green technologies like electric cars, for example.
But that's where the carbon price comes in, because you actually make grey cars more expensive. So it's not necessarily about making greener, cheaper, but greyer, more expensive.
Yeah, in principle, I'm not against putting a price on carbon to internalise the externality of carbon. Of course, we do that. It's called a fuel duty escalator, and it's already about 3 times as much as Lord Stern
suggested it should be, actually, if you look at Tim Worstall's calculations. I'm not sure we haven't already internalised a lot of the externality there, but it's in some technologies more than others.
You mentioned the ozone. Interesting how the Green Movement haven't really done much to sort of advertise the successes of different kinds of environmental change. There's wonderful footage of the ozone hole closing up over recent years. Is it? Yeah. I read doomsday things you used to see in the
I've read that it hasn't closed up as fast as they were hoping.
But the direction of travel, when I was at school, so I had different pessimists to you because it was a different decade, but we were all going to be irradiated because of the ozone and all die of that. And now you have it going in the other direction.
Even though the increase in dose that you got from ozone thinning near the South Pole was less than you would get from travelling from here to Paris, let alone taking one trip in an airliner. What? No, moving that much further south and getting into brighter sunlight. Sorry, the UV dose is what I meant to say. But anyway, yeah. I mean, I think that was an exaggerated threat myself, and I'm still not entirely convinced that CFCs were the whole problem. But anyway, there you go.
This is a sort of typically erudite note to end on. I'm afraid we have run out of time. I would commend to you all the book, which is tremendous. It's full of the most fantastic facts and interesting insights into things you never would have thought to be interested in. There's a wonderful line which really sticks with me, which is you talk about which culture is the Babylonians. I think it's the Phoenicians. Was there ever more splendid people in the world than the Phoenicians? There's always great things.
I love the Phoenicians. They didn't have kings. They didn't have priests. Well, they probably did actually. They traded all over the Mediterranean, and they invented the alphabet.
They were really awesome. Matt, thank you so much for your presentation this evening. I found it extremely interesting. I commend your book to everybody here this evening, and thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you.